It is a very unique model that you're seeing something that was paid for almost exclusively. Probably 99% of all funds in this initiative were paid for by the Gauteng legislature, who allocated money to the Gauteng Department of Education. So the money was paid for, it was run by the department, the initiative was the department's initiative. Gauteng Primary Literacy and Mathematics, or Language and Mathematics Strategy, GPLMS for short. So this is a slide that I've borrowed from next fall. You've probably all seen it. If you've been to a presentation, it's essentially one of the characteristics of South African education is what linked school. In fact, he borrowed it from me, and I borrowed it from Martin Gustafsson, called the bimodal distribution of achievement. Bimodal means that there are two modes. Essentially, we've got a system in South Africa that continues to be deeply unequal. So we've got one education system that generally serves rural and working class kids, poor kids throughout South Africa, and a second that now increasingly caters for middle class kids. And the really important piece of that is that the bottom mode, the big mountain on this side, is extremely weak in terms of literacy. So when we're thinking about an education system, we don't have a universal single problem. We've got two problems, or one problem in particular. A problem where most working class kids are going to a school system that is not necessarily getting children to learn at the level that we're expecting. And that's really an important insight. So the GPLMS essentially deals with this problem, and it doesn't really address this problem. It explicitly understands that the big challenge in South Africa is with underperforming schools and underperforming systems. The second big assumption, again, this is from next fall, is that the problem emanates very early on in the system. So we've got research evidence which suggests that for the majority in that first big mountain, those children at grade 3 are already 2.5 years, possibly 2 years behind where they're supposed to be in the curriculum in terms of the curriculum expectations. So if you're in science education or in maths education, by the time the kids get to grade 8 or grade 9, those children are often 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe 5 years below the curriculum expectation. And that's something that is really important, and that once you're behind, it's extremely difficult to catch up. Now, it's not that everybody's behind. In every school, and I've seen this consistently from my research, there are always clevers. There is always a handful of kids that are doing well. The problem is the majority of children in historically disadvantaged schools are substantially below the curriculum expectation, and that once you're below, this is sort of the curriculum expectation, the kind of quintile 5 schools, once you're below, the gap is extremely large. So it's very hard when you get to, say, grade 9 to catch up when you've already had this historical backlog. And those of you working at kind of catch up see how incredibly challenging it is. And there's a combination of language deficits, there's a combination of deficits that exacerbates the challenge of a system that essentially a bimodal system that we currently have in the system. So, but essentially, in the early days, the project consists of what we call 4 pillars. Okay? There was, doesn't come up very well, but measuring literacy, so we were going to use the ANA results, and we're going to use the ANA results to drive improvement. That turned out to be another very important part of the intervention. It never became central, and I'll talk about that in the discussion later. The core of the intervention became strengthening the teaching of literacy and mathematics, and that included lesson plans, the provision of good quality resources, and a catch-up program that came later in 2012, and then a different model of training of teachers. Training of teachers, we began to look at and explore the idea of providing teachers with coaches in the classroom rather than the conventional way in which training took place at a central level. So that was the heart of the GPLMS. The third one was improving learner support. So there was a strategy to improve support of learners in the homework, and we piggybacked with extended public works programs. So there were a whole lot of posts available. So we used those posts to create what we called homework assistants who work in schools with kids after school. And then there was the fourth pillar, which was to work with district officials and with school management teams. Just to give you a sense of the scope, initially we began working in 2011. It really ended. The big implementation was only 2011 and 2012 and 2013. By 2014 it was really being scaled down. So we had really only 3 full years of implementation, and for the maths it was only 2 years. We initially worked on home language in 2011. In 2012 we went into language and maths all the way from grade 1 to grade 7. But really mostly grade 1 to grade 6, although we did work in grade 7 as well. By the end of the project it was in over 1,000 schools. Initially it was 793 schools, and we extended up into a further over 200 schools. Again, I'm sorry about this, but essentially, so what was the thinking that was underlying the project? The first and most important insight is that we recognize that providing inputs, in the conventional school improvement is a new science labs or additional graded readers or big books was not going to work. So preventional input that would lead to outcomes, outmode thinking, and we recognize that as a well-established literature. What we had to focus on was how we can address the core business. The core business is instruction. The second big idea that came from Collins today, and again American ideas, but nonetheless very useful, is that you need to have systematic alignment and coherence of various, what we call, we've come to call, and I use the word now, instructional infrastructure. Now, what is instructional infrastructure? Lesson plans, workbooks, graded readers, assessment instruments, professional development. They all need to be seen as a single package. That's very important. There's another very important insight again that comes from a variety of sources, and that is that teachers need a great deal more guidance than we conventionally think of. We recognize that particularly for teachers that were struggling and were not achieving the outcomes they need to do much, we need to provide much more guidance. And finally, there's a recognition and essentially a summary of some of these insights. They wrote a very important, McKinsey wrote an important book on sort of system-wide change. And one of the insights is that depending on where you are in the change journey, you do need a particular kind of strategy. So here is the sort of the key components of the learnings that we've gathered from the literature. We needed to have national targets. It was a really important moment to have national leadership providing us with targets that we needed to, and that was certainly the catalyst for the NEC to take up the process. We need to have external assessment and accountability systems. So you have the AMP process that began to put in place some of the external assessment. We have external evaluations as well that provide insights. And accountability, we never did that really well, but I'm going to talk a little bit about how accountability works in a way that was quite unanticipated. We recognized that we needed to give teachers much more guidance about how to translate initially the NCS and now the CAPS into day-to-day work in schools. Teachers needed to have much more insights into the way to do it, and that's what we call the prescriptive curriculum. We've also recognized that if you have a prescriptive curriculum,